Well, hello, everyone. Happy Sunday. I hope you all had a glorious Christmas break. Welcome to Effed Up News of the Week. This is a stream that I do on Sundays at 5 p.m. Eastern Time where we talk about, well, some of the more effed up stories of the week just to round things out. Anything that we haven't had a chance to talk about during the week, we get to on Sundays. And we have a really full lineup today. In fact, I had to do some editing today when it came to picking out the stories for effed up news. Today's going to be like the race edition. I mean, when don't we talk about race, right? Race is constantly on everyone's mind. But this week, apparently, I don't know what it was, man. I don't know. Does Christmas bring out the inner racist in people? I just don't understand. But we've got a lot of stories to cover today. But before we get into it, I just want to remind people that the very best way to support the work I do is by joining my locals community. You can always join my locals community for free at kb.locals.com. Bing! But if you want to keep me independent, if you want me to be able to tell you the truth without having to answer to any overlord or anyone that wants to dictate my opinions for me, the very best way to do that is to become a supporter in Locals. When you become a supporter in Locals, you get access to whole metric F-ton of exclusive Locals perks to include exclusive content just for my local supporters, including 2 community Zoom calls every single week where you get to come in and talk about whatever you want to talk about, interact with me. I spend about 6 hours a week on Zoom calls with my locals. It actually might be even more in 2022. We do crafting bitches together. We do book club. We're going to start doing small group community discussions in our supporter only Discord, which is another perk that you get access to. Locals is going to be hopping next year. I'm so excited. I've been spending the weekend kind of doing some research for some new content that I wanted to bring into Locals, all about personal empowerment, perspective, mindfulness, seeing the world in a better place. Because to be quite frank, I think that one of the things that we all need that's missing from the conversation about how to fight back against woke like insanity in our lives is to make sure we have the perspective that that we want to have. Let's see. Emphasize says you dox people by harvesting their email addresses. Nope. I didn't dox anyone. I retweeted a tweet of someone tweeting their own email address, but I didn't force them to tweet their own email address. You can go talk to the sex offender that's been stalking me on Twitter and have a conversation about why he decided to tweet his own email address that I then used to block his ass in Locals, because I will do anything to keep my Locals community nice and pristine and troll free. And if you don't know what that little exchange was just about, guys, just go check my Twitter. I have a little Twitter troll that accidentally outed his email address on Twitter, so I blocked his ass in my Locals community to keep it nice for everyone, because Locals is the only troll-free place on the internet. If you want access to all the supporter-only perks, it comes in at $5 a month. It also could come in at $50 a year, which gives you 2 months for free. You could also make a one-time gift if that's more your jam. And well, that's really my whole Locals spiel for today. So let's jump right into it, shall we? Oh, by the way, guys, that's not my only spiel. I will be doing, after Effed Up News today, I will be doing a Locals exclusive live stream. Now, it's available to anyone. You don't have to be a supporter to get access to the live stream. So as long as you're in the community, and again, might as well sign up if you're watching the stream anyway, kb.locals.com. As long as you're in the community, you're going to get access to the live stream. But I will be doing a Locals exclusive live stream right after Effed Up News today. I will tell you guys that depending on when we get done Effed Up News, it might be a little bit of a shorter stream because I have something to do at 7. Okay, so we're going to rock right into the news and get started. And we're going to start with the land of fantasy. You know, last week, I think it was last week, maybe the week before, I declared that moving forward, this was going to be a pro-reality channel. And so I can't think of a better way to start off this week by a made-up fantasy groping that occurred in a virtual environment. This is on The Blaze. Woman says she was virtually groped in Facebook's VR metaverse investigation launched. Now listen. I actually do take sexual harassment and sexual assault pretty dang seriously, as anyone who follows any of my Twitter storms about the issue of abortion dang well knows I take it extraordinarily seriously. However, I do not take the issue of a virtual groping in a metaverse all that seriously. And quite frankly, I think it demeans actual sexual assault when we're making this up in the name of being victimized, because that's all stuff like this is. If someone says they were groped in a virtual environment, I'm sorry. You're looking for a reason to play victim because you think it's going to get you attention. You think it's going to get you virtue points. I don't really care what the reason is. I just think it's a little absurd. A woman claims she was virtually groped in a virtual reality world, and an investigation has been launched. Gee, I wonder how much money they are spending on this investigation of a fictitious groping in a virtual environment. A female believes she was the victim of sexual harassment while testing out a virtual world from Meta, the company formerly known as Facebook. The alleged victim was a beta tester on VR platform Horizon Worlds, a social experience where you can explore, play, and create. The virtual world allows users to design worlds of your own to get to know other members of the community and be inspired by their creations. The virtual reality metaverse offers interactive puzzles and action-packed games. The woman claimed she was virtually groped during the testing period on November 26th. Tech blog The Verge was the first to report the incident. Safety is a big concern for a VR environment like Horizon Worlds, where you can easily interact with someone you don't know. Earlier this month, the beta tester posted in the official Horizon group on Facebook about how her avatar was groped by a stranger. Sexual harassment is no joke on the regular internet, but being in VR adds another layer that makes the event more intense, she wrote. Not only was I groped last night, but there were other people there who supported the behavior, which made me feel isolated in the plaza. I'm sorry. I am actually completely on board with investigations into real world complaints. I believe that nonsense like this fundamentally diminishes reports of assault and harassment in the real world. This is not real. Virtual reality is not real life. Just like Twitter is not real life and should not be treated as such, virtual reality is not effing real life. And to be quite frank, the fact that this is even remotely taken seriously should alarm everyone. And I question, is this a result of the pandemic where everyone was stuck in their houses? I mean, usually insane people like this are going to be stuck in their houses for a lot longer than like normal people who are more hinged into reality. Is this a result of the pandemic, or would this have happened anyway? Because if we are going to start treating things that happen in the computer as a real world event, I mean, I'm sorry, this is not real. You were not physically harmed in the virtual reality space. So insane. Following the woman's allegations that she was virtually groped, Meta launched an investigation into the incident. The company, formerly known as Facebook, determined that the tester did not activate a safety feature designed to prevent harassment on the platform. They have a safety feature about this. I mean, I suppose that that's kind of valid, to be really honest. I suppose that a safety feature could actually prevent some of this nonsense from even occurring in the first place. That's valid. Vivek Sharma, Meta's vice president of Horizon, called the incident absolutely unfortunate and admitted the tech company needs to work on making the safety blocking feature trivially easy and findable. The safe zone option allows users who feel threatened to press the blue shield button that takes you to a safe zone where you can escape and take a break. Have we really raised an entire generation of people to lack so much resilience that they need a button in a virtual reality world that takes them to a safe space? How much do you want to bet? How much do you want to bet that this woman, okay, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, How much do you want to bet that this woman will repeatedly come and not turn on this safety feature and repeatedly scream harassment, harassment, harassment in this meta universe now that she knows that it's a way to get attention? Because that's really what this is about. This is not about any harm that was actually done to this person. It was an avatar. It's not effing real. But how much do you want to bet that the fact that this got all this attention is only going to encourage more people to say, oh my God, virtual groping? People need to start spending some more time in the real world. I don't know about you guys. I've spent a lot more time in the real world in the past couple days, and it's been fucking glorious. Actually, not even just the past couple days, like this month, really. It's been actually really, really nice. As it turns out, there are people, check this out, guys. As it turns out, there are people out in the world that don't constantly live in the insanity called the internet, that are just like doing normal things and living normal lives and talking about normal things that aren't the news. Oh my God. But that's not the only insane thing that happened this week. Let's jump into our race discussion, shall we? This one was a little annoying to me. As a big fan of Peter Dinklage in the Game of Thrones, this is a little annoying, but you know, he's probably doing what he thinks he needs to do. Peter Dinklage claims backlash to Game of Thrones was because people wanted the pretty white people to ride off into the sunset together. Peter Dinklage, who played Tyrion Lannister in Game of Thrones, HBO's live-action adaptation of George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire, recently claimed that some of the backlash to the show's ending was because people wanted the pretty white people to ride off into the sunset together. No. That was not the backlash to the ending. The ending, Game of Thrones, sucks. If there is any cause that we should all be able to rally around, it's that the ending to Game of Thrones sucked. I'm sorry. The last couple seasons were questionable at best. There were some good moments. Some of the battles were pretty badass. But the ending to Game of Thrones was absolutely unexcusable to anyone that had watched the entire series and had fallen in love with the entire series. It was an unexcusable, like, monstrosity what they did at the end of that show. Dinklage's comments came in a wide-ranging interview discussing his latest film. The New York Times' Kyle Buchanan brought up Game of Thrones, asking Dinklage, George R.R. Martin wanted Game of Thrones to go on for 2 more seasons. Do you think it should have? Or was it the right time to end it? The actor responded, it was the right time. No less, no more. You don't want to wear out your welcome, although I'm not sure the show could have. I think the show would have been resoundingly better if they had done a couple more seasons. Because part of the problem with the end of Game of Thrones is they tried to pack everything in to a space in which it simply could not fit. The stories were not developed. The ending made absolutely no sense. On one side, from one perspective, the ending was completely formulaic, and on the other side, it just made no effing sense. It was like completely out of bounds with the entire rest of the series. I don't know why we always have to spoil nice things. Dinklage then provided his opinion on why there was so much backlash to the show's ending, saying, but I think the reason there was some backlash about the ending is because they were angry at us for breaking up with them. We were going off the air, and I didn't know what to do with and they didn't know what to do with their Sunday nights anymore. They wanted more. So the backlash was about that. No. There are actually plenty of things to do on Sunday nights. You know, we have this little thing called, like, on demand. We can watch whatever the F we want. It doesn't actually have to be on Sunday night, even, as it turns out. You can, like, you know what you can do? Guys, check this out. You can record stuff during the week, like on DVR, and then watch it on Sunday nights. Is Peter Dinklage not aware that DVR is a thing that almost everyone who has cable has? And if they don't, they have things that are on demand? What an absurd answer. George Andre Velasco Nunez says the last 3 seasons were basically fan fiction. They didn't have the source material to refer to. That's exactly right. That's what happened with Game of Thrones, is they had the source material to refer to for, like, the first half of it, and then the second half just went completely off the rails because the showrunners or the writers were not as creative as the original author. But man, what a great show. What a great show for like the first half of it. It was like there was no better show on TV than Game of Thrones during the first part of it. And then it's like you want it to keep being awesome, but it just got so disappointing, man. Like I wanted to like them. I wanted to like the final seasons of Game of Thrones, and it just wasn't there. Dinklage then asserted, "We have to end when we did because what the show was really good at was breaking preconceived notions. Villains became heroes, and heroes became villains." If you know your history, when you track the progress of tyrants, they don't start off as tyrants. I'm talking about, spoiler alert, what happened at the end of Game of Thrones with the character change. The Game of Thrones elaborated, it's gradual, and I love how power corrupted these people. What happens to your moral compass when you get a taste of power? Human beings are complicated characters, you know. Buchanan would then ask a follow-up. I think some people really didn't want the happily ever after ending, even though Game of Thrones told us it was not that show from the very beginning. Dinklage answered, they wanted the pretty white people to ride off into the sunset together. By the way, it's fiction. There's dragons in it. Move on. No, but the show subverts what you think, and that's what I love about it. You know, I mean, he's right about that. But I really do think that Peter Dinklage doesn't have his finger on the pulse of what people actually want. Maybe, you know, this to me screams, to be really blunt, this to me screams that he felt like he needed to say something because the remarks just seem completely out of step with the other comments that he's had. So it's like, okay, I don't know what to say. Let's throw white people under the bus because that's going to get me the virtue points that I'm after. But of course, anyone who actually watched the show knows that that is absolutely absurd. But real life, sadly, does mirror what Hollywood shows us. Check this out from Breitbart. Minnesota School Board votes unanimously to allow extra pay for non-white teachers and racial segregation of staff. Huh, that sounds like it's not entirely legal. The Mankato School Board in Minnesota voted unanimously for a new policy that allows non-white teachers exclusively to be eligible for additional stipends and for teachers to be segregated by race. I wonder if teachers are allowed to like self-identify what their race is. That might throw a wrench into things. Let's read the policy. The policy states professional development funds may be used as 1. Additional stipends and incentives to mentors of color who are American Indian. 2. Financial supports for professional learning, community affinity groups across schools within and between districts for teachers from underrepresented racial and ethnic groups to come together throughout the year. 3. Programs for induction aligned with the school district or school mentorship programs during the first 3 years of teaching, especially for teachers from underrepresented racial and ethnic groups. What the hell happened in Minnesota? Minnesota is like one of the epicenters of crazy town. What in the hell happened in Minnesota? I mean, I'm honestly asking if anyone in the chat has any ideas. Grants for these purposes may be used for retention strategies or promotion from unrequested leave absences in the beginning of the year of employment for teachers of color and teachers who are American Indian, the policy states, adding, retention strategies may include providing financial incentives for teachers of color and teachers who are American Indian and placing American Indian educators at sites with other American Indian educators and educators of color at sites with other educators of color to reduce isolation and increase opportunity for collegial support. Why do people need to be from the same racial background in order to provide collegial support? I mean, honestly, how does this even make sense? This policy was probably written literally by someone with diversity in their title. How does it make sense for someone who probably has diversity in their title or is writing this policy in the name of diversity and inclusion, how does it make sense to say, in order to achieve diversity, we need to put people with people who look like them because those are the only people who are going to provide them with collegial support is people who look like them. Board members defended the policy of placing same race teachers in work environments, claiming it is not segregation. Well, that's actually exactly what segregation is. When you're a minority of a white majority, it can be very isolating and lonely, said board member Aaron. To have have a support system in place for them is not to segregate them. It is to support them. Up is down. War is love. It's not about trying to throw the few BIPOC individuals we have into one building. It's about showing them they're not alone. This is absolutely Orwellian. It creates global citizens at the end of the day. Oh, fair is involved, obviously. State Rep Jeremy Munson, however, condemned the new policy, which mirrors the Minnesota statute. Our largest local school district just voted to pay people differently, not on merit or on the content of their character, but based solely on the color of their skin. Yeah, Hallie says, isn't this isolating them further? I mean, I wouldn't say it's isolating them further, but I think that listen, when we're talking about workplaces and getting support from your colleagues, I have never once run any sort of training workshop or anything in which I said, you know, who are the best people for you to get support from as colleagues? People with skin color that's like yours. That just makes absolutely no sense. That doesn't speak to their knowledge. It doesn't speak to their background. It doesn't speak to their experience. I don't know why we continue to make assumptions about people based on the color of their skin, about what they like, what they don't, what they're good at, what they're not, how they can support each other. I don't know who needs to hear this, but anyone of any skin color can support any other colleague of any other skin color. This isn't enhancing diversity. This is reducing diversity. But, you know, this is the land we live in. From Fox News, 1619 Project's Nicole Hannah-Jones argues journalists are just too neutral. Too neutral. On Wednesday, 1619 Project author Nicole Hannah-Jones promoted the idea that journalists should be more biased against conservatives. The New York Times journalist appeared on CNN's New Day to comment on a report by CNN reporter Evan that followed the claims that Republicans wanted to ban books from school libraries. Listen, you guys got to cut out with the book banning. I'm sure I'm not talking to anyone in my chat right now that's trying to do this, but there are absolutely groups that are arguing to ban certain books, Moms for Liberty. You guys got to cut this shit out. I posted a video, what was it, maybe like a month ago, targeted directly at parents who it seemed were making the argument to ban books. And I say, cut this shit out. It's going to be used against us. Now what's happening? This is all I see anymore on the left. They are directly attacking this point. Now, I am not talking about the books that depict sexual acts. I'm not talking about those comics that are going around that are absolutely in schools that should not be in schools. That's not what I'm talking about. But there are absolutely parent groups out there that are focusing more on banning books than they are on almost anything else. And it's giving the left all the ammo that they need. You guys have got to cut this shit out because it's going to make us all look bad and it's going to get in the way of actually initiating real change on things that matter more than if a book you don't like is in the school library. All right, back to the article. Fill-in host Erica Hill began by asking Hannah-Jones, as you look at where we are right now, what do we stand to lose as a country by going down the road of banning books, by ignoring accurate history, by vilifying people who are simply trying to make reading history accurately available? Listen, I want to point this out. Look how they incorporated the book banning thing into the argument. Because there is actual evidence that there are conservative groups trying to ban books. That's real. Shouldn't be happening, but it is happening. And then they take that and they include it with everything else. So it's like you take this one truth right here of like, oh, there are these groups that want to ban books. And then you say, by ignoring accurate history. Well, no one's actually doing that. That's made up. By vilifying people who are simply trying to make reading and history accurately available. That's made up. That's not real. But because you're starting with something that is actually real and is actually happening, and we can point to multiple examples of this, it gives credence to everything else. This is like, we've got to be smarter than them, guys. We really just do. I know some of you don't like when I lecture you, but like, I don't know what other way to say this. We have to be smarter than them. Banning books isn't going to solve the problem. Hill also referenced a question posed by Hannah Jones from the Associated Press, which said, we, as Americans, are going to be severely tested in the next year or two to decide what are we willing to sacrifice to be the country we believe we are. Hannah Jones responded, affirming the claim that one political party is attacking voting rights, banning books, and opposing history. I don't know that our institutions are going to hold with the assaults that we are seeing on voting rights, on the attempts to ban books, on the memory laws, which they're calling anti-critical race theory laws, but they're really anti-history laws. Well, that's nonsense, of course. These are all means of stroking division and resentment, and I don't think we quite know where we're going to go at this moment. The claims of Republicans banning books emerged from the Virginia gubernatorial election when Democrat politicians, including Joe Biden, accused Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin wanting to ban books from libraries for political reasons. And that was not true. But again, there are parents groups that are doing this. In reality, Youngkin attacked his opponent, Terry McAuliffe, for vetoing legislation that would have allowed parents to be notified if their children were introduced to sexually explicit material. Hill then brought up another quote from Hannah Jones saying, you also noted in that interview that we need to really ask ourselves as journalists, storytellers, narrators, if we're ringing the alarm bell in the right way. So are we? So here you have them advocating that journalists should be activists. Hannah Jones argued that journalists not ringing the alarm bell could actually be upholding people with authoritarian ideas. I think that there are certainly political journalists and others who are trying to, but I think there are far too many in our profession who are really normalizing what's happening right now in an attempt to be or appear to be objective. Now, an attempt to say, well, we're going to treat both political parties equally, when we clearly have in this moment one political party that is passing anti-democratic policies that is upholding people with authoritarian ideas. She concluded, we are the firewall of this democracy, and I do not believe the firewall is holding right now. Well, that's a little ironic. It is a little ironic, since we also have Nicole Hannah Jones just today going on to Meet the Press and arguing that parents shouldn't really be in charge of what their kids are learning. Let's listen. We're going to put this in a new window because we're going to listen to this clip. I think that the fact that this comes on the heels of her saying that journalists really shouldn't really be neutral because that's not journalism. We're allowing authoritarians to take over. It's a little ironic, isn't it, that she's doing this while also stating that, parents really shouldn't be in charge of the education that their kids are receiving. Got to put it in a new window so we can hear the sound. Let me bring this up. Meet the Press today, man. You cannot make this stuff up. Hang on one second. It's got to change one more setting. And then we'll be able to listen to this clip. There we go. This is on Becker News. All right, guys. Let me know if you can't hear the sound.
I don't really understand this idea that parents should decide what's being taught. I'm not a professional educator. I don't have a degree in social studies or science. We send our children to school because we want them to be taught by people who have an expertise in the subject area. And that is not my job. When the governor or the candidate said that he didn't think parents should be deciding what's being taught in school, he was panned for that. But that's just the fact. This is why we send our children to school and don't homeschool, because these are the professional educators who have the expertise to teach social studies, to teach history, to teach science, to teach literature. And I think we should leave that to the educators. Yes,
I think it's a little ironic that Nicole Hannah-Jones doesn't seem to understand that most teachers are not actually subject matter experts. If they come through a school of education, they're not a subject matter expert in whatever they're teaching. I'm sorry. They're not. And of course, schools of education are one of the primary places in which these teachers are getting indoctrinated into ideas like Nicole Hannah-Jones preaches. Yeah, Deborah says she's anti-homeschool. She's also anti-school choice. Nicole Hannah-Jones all the time on Twitter talks about how school choice people don't really believe that Black children should be able to choose whatever school they go to. Well, yeah, they do actually. Yeah, they do. So she's pro-journalists taking a political position. She is anti-parent having any say in their child's education because parents really aren't the experts. And ew, those homeschool parents over there. Gee, it certainly sounds to me like Nicole Hannah-Jones not really a fan of teaching any sort of objective history, while also constantly arguing that objective history is the only one that should be taught. And so is it any wonder? Is it any wonder that we are getting articles like this from BuzzFeed? Deplatform white parents. One of the groups that's under attack in this entire thing, and frankly, the group that's going to be responsible for stepping up and saving us all, are frankly parents. I can argue all day, every day about the schools and how much they're indoctrinating your children and how you should remove the children from your schools. And how I don't want to pay property tax in New Hampshire because I don't think that I should be funding schools. A, that I don't have children in any way. B, that I just believe are indoctrination factories for the state. I can do that all day, every day. But the fact of the matter is that I don't have kids. Sometimes I wonder why I care more about people's kids than they seem to. But this is what we're ultimately going, folks. This is it. Right here. Why only white parents, Hallie asks? Well, let's read. Let's read. Earlier this month, British media once again platformed a talking point pushed by anti-trans activists. The Sunday Times, among other outlets, reported on a backlash to a hypothetical scenario in which a sex offender might choose to identify as a woman. The imaginary notion was elevated onto a news item, speaks to the entrenched anti-trans of British media. But then Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling tweeted an article farther elevating the narrative. She became a trending topic on Twitter, promoting a link between transness and sexual violence. U.S. media covered the tweet as a controversy that implied there might be a real threat posed by trans self-determination. Hang on. It might be too obvious to state, but there isn't. In fact, there is actually an ongoing epidemic of violence against trans women. Oh, we're in the trans debate, are we? We're in the trans debate. Let's scroll down a little bit, because here's where we're going to get to whiteness. Rowling's celebrity status as a celebrity billionaire affords her extra protection and the benefit of the doubt, while also helping to amplify her talking points. I mean, I don't think many media outlets actually give J.K. Rowling the benefit of the doubt anymore, but okay. But it's specifically because she speaks as a white woman with concerns about the safety of women and children that her anti-trans framing is accepted on Twitter and treated by the media at large as worthy of debate. Listen, man, if you watched last week's episode of Effed Up News, you know that we, again, covered how J.K. Rowling is being dragged in every progressive media outlet for tweeting out an opinion. Never explicitly framed as a misinformation agent who might merit deplatforming, Rowling is a symptom of the current media ecosystem in which disinformation about minorities' identities is accepted as legitimate controversy. This scenario comes into play whenever powerful people, institutions, or political organizations raise public concerns about the protection of majority groups, especially white women and children. In fact, two of the biggest, seemingly unrelated culture war stories of this year were propelled by similar reframing of misinformation as legitimate debate. Those so-called controversies were supposedly about trans people, especially trans girls and women, and teaching history known as the critical race theory debate. Isn't it interesting how they're now trying very, very hard to say that teaching critical race theory is just teaching history? Has anyone noticed that they're using those terms almost interchangeably almost every time we read an article about critical race theory? I mean, they did it in this. She did it in this article right here. In the same breath, the left will say, schools aren't teaching critical race theory. Then they'll say, critical race theory is only taught in law schools. And then they'll say, teaching critical race theory is history. If we're going to talk about disinformation in the media, we might start with the fact that in almost every single article that they write about critical race theory, they're using multiple arguments that directly contradict each other. Is it just taught in law schools? Or is critical race theory critical to teaching accurate history? Choose one. Can't have both. Both were part of the political backlashes that came in response to increased visibility for minority groups, increased representation of trans people in media and public debate about gender and Black Lives Matter protests in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. Framed largely by right-wing activists and think tanks as human interest stories about fairness in sports and classrooms, they circulated into national legacy media, including publications like USA Today, CBS, The Atlantic, New York Times, through first-person opinion pieces by mothers of cis athletes raising fears about trans inclusion, or human interest reports featuring on-the-ground stories of white moms airing complaints about supposed radical ideas being introduced in schools. Well, I do want to say this. About this. This is a concern that I have because it is true. It absolutely is true that the majority of the coverage surrounding critical race theory at this point is like the backlash is coming from professional activists. Professional activists who are entrenched, many of them in the GOP, who are making a lot of money by being activists. Now, I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with making money when you're doing good work, but I do have questions about why. Let me say it this way. I know a lot of whistleblowers. When I say whistleblower, I mean someone who has put themselves out there to speak up about what's been going on in their organization, whether they work at colleges or schools or any of that. A lot of us talk behind the scenes. I've become friends with many of them. And there is a stark difference between the whistleblowers, the average people, the ones that are actually bringing stories to the forefront, and the organizations that are taking the credit for it. And in fact, and I'm not going to say who at this particular point, you guys know my opinions on FAIR, but there are other organizations that are doing it as well. I've seen directly some of these conservative organizations that are on Fox News all the effing time treat whistleblowers really, really, really horribly. And I do actually think it is a fair criticism that the left has of the right to say that the people that the right are popping up on all these media outlets aren't necessarily people who have been impacted like boots on the ground, like the whistleblowers have. They're people who are making money by being professional conservative activists. I'm starting to really have a problem with that. Especially when I see people who have put themselves out there, many of them who have lost their jobs or will be losing their jobs, treated really effing badly by these organizations. That doesn't sit well with me. It doesn't sit well with me. And, you know, you guys, I mean, I've talked about my issues with FAIR as one of the organizations that has absolutely treated multiple whistleblowers very, very, very badly. You guys don't even know half the stories I know. But there are other organizations doing it too. All right. That's all I have to say about that for right now. Maybe more as I continue to ponder that specific point. Whatever the content of reporting articles or articles and platforming these issues through the concerns of cis and white people, why are cis and white people getting conflated in this? That's another question I have. A mainstream media helped distort what constitutes legitimate perspectives for coverage, and in doing so sidelined the actual difficulties experienced by marginalized communities, including Black and trans youth. Ultimately, this kind of coverage raises deeper questions about news organizations and who decides the perspective of culture war journalism. There's a long history in the US of setting the terms for the debate by centering media narratives around the well being of white women and children. It's usually associated with anti Black and anti gay right wing activism that can be traced to anti school integration campaigns in the 60s, the Save the Children anti gay campaign in the 70s, and even the coverage questioning how children would fare under marriages between same sex couples in the aughts. Listen, this is real. I'm sorry. This is what happens when conservatives focus on social issues. All this stuff, completely legitimate. All this stuff was what made me a Democrat. And quite frankly, it's like I see conservatives and the right going back to focusing on social issues now. I've been screaming about this for a dang near a year. And it's like they learned nothing from the past. Right-wing activists use similar framings to introduce the so-called controversy over critical race theory. Attempts to eradicate histories of race in the U.S. are nothing new, but as recently as 2011, activists attempted to ban ethnic studies and Mexican American studies curricula in Arizona. But ethnic studies simply doesn't have the polarizing or concerning ring necessary to stroke a national panic about the existing curricular offerings, like studying civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. The term critical race theory was perfect for right-wing campaigns, though, because as one activist told The New Yorker this summer, to most Americans, it connotes a hostile, academic, divisive, race-obsessed, poisonous, elitist, anti-American attitude. So a long-term campaign to dismantle any talks of race and history in schools was rebranded as a crusade against critical race theory. No, that's not true. Even though the term actually refers to graduate level theory about the intersections of law and culture and structural racism, that has nothing to do with elementary history in school classrooms. Listen, they just did it again. Look at this. Literally, earlier in this article, they said teaching critical race theory is just teaching history. And now they're saying critical race theory isn't taught in schools. So far as I'm concerned, for my purposes right now, there isn't a whole heck of a lot of a difference, to be really blunt about it. So far as I'm concerned, there's not a whole heck of a lot of a difference. There's a long history in the US of setting the terms of the debate by centering media narratives around the well-being of white women and children. You know, isn't it funny? Isn't it funny that they lost the governor's race in Virginia because let me play out this timeline for you guys. Number 1, Terry McAuliffe in Virginia in the governor's campaign doubled down on critical race theory and said flat out in the debate that parents should not be teaching or should not be in charge of like what their students are learning in schools, right? That led to Terry McAuliffe getting his ass kicked in that governor's race because, yes, white women, many of whom defected from the Democrats, said, no, 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 no. You've gone far enough now. So the reason that the Democrats lost that race was because women defected from the left because they wanted to have say in what their kids were learning in schools. We then found out, probably about a week or two after this election, that the Democrats were completely planning on doubling down on critical race theory. We know this because they said it. I did a whole video about it on the channel. The Democrats were not going to learn the lesson in Virginia, but instead they were going to double down on critical race theory as one of their issues. And quite frankly, we saw the right kind of back off of doubling down on school choice and the anti-CRT movement in favor of effing abortion, which pissed me off, but I still think they can bring that back. So we now have a Democratic Party that's like, okay, we're all in on critical race theory. So what do we need to do? What do we need to do to get the votes back? Well, we have to attack white women and make them believe they're racist if they want to hand in what their kids are learning. We need to plan to see more articles like this, guys. Watch what's going to happen. There's going to be many more attacks specifically on white mothers because the Democrats want to double down on critical race theory as part of their election strategy. And the only way they can do that is by convincing white mothers that they are racist if they vote for Republicans. This is exactly what they did with white men and Joe Biden. This is precisely what they did with white men and Joe Biden. The group that determined, well, if you believe the election was fair, and we can have that debate another time, the group that swung towards Biden, that swung for Trump in 2016, was white men. How did that happen? Because they hit them with 4 effing years of diversity training. They convinced white men that they were racist. And so then the white men, because they had their what is it? It makes sense though, right? If you have people that aren't tuned into what's going on, they aren't tuned into the culture war, and they hear over and over and over and over and over again, white men are racist, white men are racist, white men are racist. They have to do training at work. Their kids are bringing stuff home. Their wife makes them read White Fragility. It makes sense that voting demographic's going to swing. Well, I don't want to be a racist. Being a racist is one of the worst things we can be called. Now they're trying to do the same thing to white women. Watch for more coverage of stories like this. The idea of the country as race-obsessed and race discourse as destructively divisive was already percolating in the wake of Black Lives Matter protests, especially after George Floyd's murder. Outlets like the New York Times and The Atlantic dedicated valuable resources to reporting on the supposed excess of anti-racism. Those nuanced stories by white journalists included one about a Black father's school board campaign against anti-racism. In the Times, there was a story about a Black student who made a supposedly false accusation of racial profiling at Smith College. It wasn't supposedly false. It was actually false. Even attempts at self-reflection centered whiteness and painted anti-racism as an elitist concern. A story about the Times' own newsroom racism was used to highlight how privileged white high schoolers now felt entitled to call out racism. Right-wing think tanks like the Manhattan Institute. Who's associated with the Manhattan Institute? Pop quiz in the chat. Who's associated with the Manhattan Institute? Why are they attacking that specifically? Promoted the precise notion online and in legacy media to activate parents into believing anti-racism was out of control. Quotes from concerned moms rather stroked their fears. They're making my son feel like a racist because of the pigmentation of his skin. Ding, ding, ding. Sour Kiwi gets the prize. Chris Rufo. Manhattan Institute is Chris Rufo. That's why they mentioned it. The idea of talking about race wasn't necessarily new to many Black and brown parents for whom discussing the realities of inequity and existing in a white world isn't an option in the same way. Yet outlets, including CBS and The Atlantic, picked up the framing too, feeding into a sense that that radically new ideas were suddenly being introduced with headlines like "When the Culture War Comes for the Kids" and "How Young is Too Young to Teach Kids About Race." Let's see. I'm just going to scroll down a little bit because this is a long-ass article. Let's see. They're talking about trans stuff. It's unquestionable that the CRT and trans debates have been pushed into the media by right-wing activism and conservative politicians through strategic waves of anti-CRT and anti-trans bills. There are even times to purposefully inflame conservatives and rally the base for elections. But at this point, it's too easy to see anti-trans and anti-Black concerns mongering is just an issue of right-wing misinformation. After all, these framings are accepted for coverage via the editorial judgments of majority white and cis newsrooms. So-called culture war issues are where the media allows itself maximum editorializing on behalf of cis white anxieties and fear of a changing world. But the terms for what becomes a culture war story are not decided by the public. Instead, they are decided by newsrooms that don't mirror a reality but certainly shape it. Isn't it funny that BuzzFeed is attacking mainstream media? Let's just put a pin in that one. Let's come back to it. Okay, let me see. American newsrooms are even whiter than the country as a whole. And it's in the context of media echo chambers that critical race theory is repackaged as controversial. Most Americans believe the history of slavery should be taught, for instance. Well, yeah. Critical race theory isn't the history of slavery. Those are two different things. And after the 2021 November election, polls showed that even the idea of critical race theory drove elections was overstated. Nope, that's not true. BuzzFeed lied about that, but that's not true. So essentially, this person is arguing that newsrooms have got to stop covering stories that they don't like. That's pretty much where it is, right? It's not an accident that in all the trans and race and trans backlash stories, class is invoked to call out how white, middle, and upper class perspectives shape newsrooms, including through media CEOs. Instead, it is invoked to imply that anti-racism or trans rights are somehow an elitist concern. Still, there have been some changes by newsrooms around framing the stories to acknowledge the power imbalance in the real world. So this is essentially what BuzzFeed is arguing is exactly in line with Nicole Hannah-Jones. They're arguing the same thing. BuzzFeed is doing it a lot less eloquently, to be honest, but they're arguing the same thing. Both BuzzFeed and Nicole Hannah-Jones, in exactly the same week, are arguing that journalists have a responsibility to be activists. Well, we've got another example of that. This time not race, though. Not race. Well, technically. Martin O'Keefe caught another live stream. It is 9:36 a.m. Monday here. Well, thank you, Martin, for tuning in. Guys, starting in 2022, I'm going to be streaming every day at 5 p.m., except for Saturdays, which I take off. So mark it down. 5 p.m. Eastern time is going to be my consistent streaming schedule for 2022. And that's going to be on every day of the week, except on Saturdays. Check this out. Far-right Jewish magazine apologizes to their readers for running an advertisement for a free trip to Israel. Or far-left Jewish magazine. Oh, God, I misread the headline. Sorry. Far-left Jewish magazine apologizes for running an ad for a free trip to Israel. This also reported in The Blaze. Jewish Currents, which advertises itself as a magazine committed to the rich tradition of thought, activism, and culture of the Jewish left, and which proudly declared on its website that it was launched within the orbit of the American Communist Party, raised eyebrows on Twitter on Thursday when they apologized to their readers. The reason for their apology? The website inadvertently ran an ad for a free trip to Israel. People think I'm anti-Semitic because I expressed a spiritual belief. I'm just saying. Didn't see any right-wing outrage over this, but okay. An apology to our readers. Dear readers, yesterday we released an ad without proper vetting for a free, all expenses paid year in Israel. The ad is not in line with our values as an organization dedicated to reporting on and opposing Israeli human rights abuses. We are returning the money that we received from this ad and will immediately begin a critical evaluation of our ad process and policies. We will publish in full the resulting advertising guidelines on our website. We apologize for this error and undermining our readers' trust. According to the Atlantic's, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Rosenberg, the ad in question was for a fellowship at the Dorrit Foundation, a 10-month training program in Israel for American Jews. The foundation is known for supporting progressive causes and describes itself on its website as an organization that supports progressive social change. I don't understand why Jews align with the left. Can someone please explain this to me? Because the left really doesn't actually seem to like Jewish people like all that much, especially in New York City. They really don't like them there. I don't understand what the logic is of aligning with people who hate you. I just don't get it. The organization's statement did not appear to give any further reason that the ad was not in line with the company's guidelines, implying that the ad was offensive for the sole reason that it was contrary to the boycott, sanctions, and divestment movement. The New York Post's Jonathan Levine posted a screenshot of the ad on Twitter. Let's see what it looked like. Let's see. The offending ad. A unique opportunity for Jews in their 20s and 30s to spend 10 months living and learning in Israel. That actually sounds pretty great. The greatest challenge and gift of the Dorrit Fellowship is taking the infinite possibilities it offers and carving those possibilities into some personally meaningful shape, okay? They develop skills, acquire experience, and broaden there's nothing offensive in this. Alumni have gone on to start spiritual communities and collectives, write for top-tier publications, direct plays and musicals, ignite social movements, and work in politics, publishing books, and more. The DFI values a variety of models of leadership and seeks candidates who are active in conventional as well as unconventional forms of civic and Jewish engagement. We welcome and encourage applicants and fellows from all backgrounds, physical, developmental abilities, and sexual orientation and gender expressions. There's literally nothing offensive in that ad. But this is the world we live in. Jewish Currents completed the self-flagellation by retweeting several of their editors who condemned the magazine for having run the ad. Editor-in-chief Ariel Angel said, had the ad been better properly, it would not have gone out. There's a typo there, Blaze. Had the ad been vetted properly, not better properly, it would have not gone out. We'd sincerely apologize, and we are committed to publishing our advertising guidelines in the future. In response to a follow-up question from a reader, Angel said that the only reason the ad went out is the site had previously operated under informal guidelines that were monitored by a single person who was sick with COVID. The account also retweeted senior staff reporter Alex, who tweeted, "The ad was a mistake." Man, people need to find their balls. I'm sorry. Your actions tell you everything about what you need to know about someone's values. The Brooklyn Way says, my distant Jewish cousins and his relatives were so TDS'd out of their minds that they started attacking me online. It was so weird. The world has gone insane. So many people are just absolutely unhinged from reality. And to be quite frank, I mean that on both the right and the left. I think there are so very many people who are unhinged from reality at this point. This actually makes sense. But let's wrap up with a couple nice stories. Now, this story doesn't start out so good, okay? This story doesn't start out so good, but I promise it gets there. Guys, just as a reminder, directly after the stream today, we will be doing a locals exclusive stream in my locals community. So you can head over to kb.locals.com. Make sure you sign up. And we'll be doing an stream exclusively after the stream today. But let's wrap up with some good news stories, okay? I hope you get skull-effed to death. Opponent of anti-CRT law pleads guilty to threatening a lawmaker. Now, this doesn't start out so good, but the fact that the guy pled guilty is a rather happy ending, I think. Check this out. Former Allentown's middle school instructor. Middle school. Let's just get his face on there. This middle school teacher believes in teaching critical race theory so much that they thought that the very best thing they could do to protect the children and make sure they could teach critical race theory in New Hampshire was to email an elected official and threaten to skull fuck him. Middle school teacher. Middle school. Former Allentown Middle School instructor Daniel Radigan has pled guilty to charges he threatened to mutilate State Representative Keith Ammon and sexually assault one of his family members in response to the Republican lawmakers' support for the anti-CRT legislation. As a reminder, Keith Ammon, who is a hero, was the person who introduced the anti-CRT bill in New Hampshire. First anti-CRT bill in any state in the country. I've gotten crazy emails, but nothing like this one. It was unhinged, Ammon said. Radigan, 31, pled guilty in Goffstown District Court on Friday to 2 misdemeanor counts, one for harassment and one for obstructing government administration. 2 other identical charges were dismissed as part of a plea agreement. Radigan will not do jail time, but instead has $1,240 in fines, which were suspended for 1 year, so long as he remains on good behavior. Radigan is not to have any contact with Ammon other than writing an apology letter. I doubt it will be sincere, Keith Ammon said. Radigan was reportedly upset with Ammon's efforts to prevent schools from teaching critical race theory-based content in New Hampshire classrooms. Ammon was one of the original sponsors of HB 544, which prohibits the dissemination of certain divisive concepts related to sex and race in state contracts, grants, and training programs. The legislation was set aside for an anti-discrimination law passed as part of the 2021 budget. Well, it wasn't really set aside. The law was put into the budget, and then Chris Sununu and Jeb Bradley and John Formello in New Hampshire effed up the law and made it so it's not really effective. But that's another story for another day. Thank you, mandatory carry. I appreciate the support. Anyway, Radigan called Ammon a racist in the messages, and he made numerous obscene and graphic threats against Ammon and a family member. I truly hope you get skull effed to death, you pathetic, privileged, white, expletive boy, Radigan wrote in one of the messages. Radigan sent the violent and obscene threats to Ammon via Facebook in late February as the politics around the anti-CRT law were getting heated. Ammon said that he and his family spent subsequent months worried for their safety. We were making sure the house was safe and making sure there were no unexpected visitors, as you can imagine. Middle school teacher. Middle school teacher. The threats started coming in on the night of February 25th and included numerous misspellings and punctuation mistakes. Ammon assumed Radigan might have been intoxicated and would think better the next day and apologize. Instead, according to Ammon, Radigan continued to display angry and unhinged behavior. Ammon went to law enforcement the next day and reported the issue first to the Protective Services, the General Court, the branch of the New Hampshire State Police that protects state representatives, and then to the new Boston Police Department. Radigan lists his employment on LinkedIn as being an educational assistant at the Armand DuPont Middle School in Allenstown. The profile claimed he'd worked at the school since 2013. On Monday, Allentown Superintendent Peter said Radigan worked at the middle school for a month and a half in 2013 and has not been employed by the district since. Well, there's that at least. Contacted by the New Hampshire Journal through his Facebook account, Radigan asked that there be no story be written because he feared losing his job, and he would not reveal where he works, but he minimized the repeated and escalated threats he made against Ammon and his family. It was a rude, empty comment that I apologize for. Well, maybe before, just pro tip, guys, maybe before you send an elected official an email saying you want to skull fuck him, maybe you think about your job before you take that step. Just pro tip. Don't send elected officials threats. I thought that this was pretty basic, but, it is what it is. Radigan's language was extremely crude, but his claims that supporters of the anti-discrimination bill are racist echoes language used by Democratic leaders in the legislature and progressive activists. It's an interesting claim given the law literally bans government-funded instructors from teaching that one race, sex, or group is inherently superior or inferior. Representative Linda opposes the anti-discrimination law because she says New Hampshire's public schools are racist. The language robs young people of an inclusive and realistic education by targeting efforts to talk about systemic racism in schools. We need to be looking at how our systems promote racial inequity and working towards solutions. Systemic racism is still alive and well. So the good news on that one is that the guy did plead guilty. He's going to pay a fine. Keith Ammon and his family are fine. And I just think, isn't this classic? Isn't it classic that a teacher is so committed to critical race theory that they think the answer to an anti-CRT bill is to threaten the family member of the lawmaker who introduced it? But to wrap it up today, guys, we've got some really good news. I love this one. You guys have all heard of the Free State Project. The Free State Project in New Hampshire is basically the idea that they are trying to get a high concentration of libertarians to move to the state of New Hampshire so that libertarians can actually have political power, doing a pretty good job. But in addition to trying to help libertarians move to New Hampshire, they've launched a new initiative. And this is something that you might want to just keep in mind. If you're looking to move to New Hampshire, or maybe you're in New Hampshire and you have some progressive friends and family members, this is the perfect time. Because the Progressive State Project, which is the counterbalance to the Free State Project, is literally going to pay for progressives to leave the state of New Hampshire and possibly do a move swap with a libertarian who would like to move to New Hampshire. Because I don't know if you guys know this, the housing market in New Hampshire right now is crazy. it is extremely, extremely hot. So if people are trying to move to New Hampshire, they're having trouble finding a place to live, they're having trouble getting a house, all this stuff. This is going to help with that because if we can move progressives out of the state and libertarians into the state, this is a win-win for everyone. This is on libertyblock.com. The progressive state swap. Living in a state where every legislative action goes against one core's ethical foundations is quite hard. Few people are more aware of this than free staters. Moving to be free. I, for example, lived in New York City, New Jersey, Chicago, Boulder, and Boston. Every day I would awaken to headlines championing some oppressive legislation, which directly conflicted with my fundamental ethical beliefs in each person's self-ownership. No longer able to ignore this facile inhumanity, I left my friends and family to migrate to the live free or die state, the number one most free state in North America, the state in which tens of thousands of other liberty lovers were flocking. As soon as I arrived, I no longer was ineffectively inveighing against human oppression, but instead nurturing the growth of human freedom. I had seen chains lifted, jails opened, businesses flourished, threats removed, extortion decreased, licenses lessened, opportunities formed, and alternatives multiply. People who are in other states risk their liberty simply because they prefer to live their lives differently than their rulers command. Breathe safely here in New Hampshire. Some unhappy New Hampshire progressives, but even as I have delighted in the hotbed of liberty, a legacy segment has become more miserable. A more free New Hampshire is the opposite of what they want to them. Their neighbor living their life as she chooses is just too much to bear. Perversely, they consider not being allowed to threaten violent police action under color of law to force their neighbor to conform her life to their preferences is a type of oppression of themselves. And so this segment has formed committees and organizations. They've held meetings and rallies to rant and to rail, warning all those who sit to listen to the awful danger posed by free staters, setting their neighbors free. And although these people want a coercive, oppressive society, the opposite of what I want for my family, I understand their frustration. Like I said, they are living in a state that is continuously moving away from the type of society they want. So if you guys haven't noticed this on my channel, every once in a while, I will stream a webinar that is directly attacking the Free State Project. Like, libertarians in New Hampshire are being effective because the Democrats in New Hampshire are more pissed off at the libertarians than they are at the Republicans. The Democrats in New Hampshire are more afraid of the libertarians than they are of the Republicans. In fact, they spend a lot of energy trying to convince people that the Republican Party is being taken over by libertarians. Can any other state say that except New Hampshire? I don't think they can. So what's going on is we got a whole bunch of progressives in New Hampshire who are like, no, no, no. Free State Project bad. They're freaking out. And now the Free State Project's basically like, well, if you don't like it, leave. And not only are they saying, if you don't like it, leave, they're now offering to pay to help them to leave. Like, how great is this? Luckily for them, progressive states are everywhere to be found. Those progressives even point to the authoritarian states immediately surrounding New Hampshire to argue, New Hampshire is out of step. Why can't New Hampshire just be like those states? They do not understand that those most driven towards expanding human freedom need one place where they can escape the progressives' cruel subjugation, and that without the safety safety valve, the entire country could well explode. The obvious alternative escapes them. Don't reoppress a segment that, at great cost, escaped the oppression of those states, but don't end the only hope for freedom in an increasingly totalitarian world, the one state that is actually embracing human freedom. Move. Move to whichever of the dozen progressive authoritarian states attracts you. Don't like guns? Scores of states profoundly infringe on the Second Amendment. Don't want parents to be able to choose alternative schools for their children? Government unions fully monopolize most states, ensuring parents will have little say in their child's education. Want to forcibly inject experimental, questionably effective, big pharma chemicals into the bodies of non-consenting adults and their children? There are progressive states that are even considering concentration camps for those who refuse. Why? There are dozens of progressive states for progressive authoritarians to escape burgeoning freedom in New Hampshire. Sadly, New Hampshire is unique in the world. There is no alternative state to send liberty lovers. So they launched the Progressive State Swap Contest. And so we're holding a contest to illustrate how this simple solution immediately decreases acrimony and increases peace. From applicants, a coalition of libertarians and progressives will select one progressive who is miserable living in the increasingly free New Hampshire and a libertarian who is miserable living in some progressive state. And we'll swap them. We will pay their expenses to move, demonstrating how such a low-cost investment instantly allows both the progressive and the libertarian to live much happier lives in states much more consistent with their values. Misery and acrimony are instantly decreased. So if you know of a progressive or a socialist who is constantly complaining about living in an increasingly free state, recommend that they apply. If they're chosen, a moving company will pack them up, transport them to whichever progressive state they prefer. We'll move them into their new digs. We'll even pay the down payment on their rental apartment. And we'll bring a liberty lover currently living in misery in that same state back here to bask in the freedom that only New Hampshire offers. And you guys can contribute if you want to support this. You can contribute funds to it. By moving to any of the progressive states, intolerant progressive authoritarians will immediately find a lifestyle much more to their liking than they will ever enjoy by remaining here, and New Hampshire will be free to continue shining its beacon of hope to the tyrannized people everywhere, with far less hostility in the midst for daring to be the one free state in an otherwise unfree world. I love this. I think the Progressive State Project is a great idea. I know they're putting a whole website together to help progressives in New Hampshire try to figure out what is the best progressive state for them. Is it Massachusetts? I literally live like 20 minutes away from the Massachusetts border. It's not even like a far move. They can move to New York. They can move to Vermont. They can move to California if they want. The Progressive State Project, man. Great idea. Great idea. Let's pay people to move to a place that they'll be more happy. And listen, man, if you want to talk about a national divorce, and I know a lot of people are talking about a national divorce and making it peaceful, this is how you make it peaceful, man. This is how you make it peaceful. Go move somewhere else. Go live somewhere else. I think it's a great idea. Great way to round out the year. All right, guys, that is all I have. Like I said, I will be moving over into my locals. And actually, let me share this one more time. If you want to join my locals, you can come on kb.locals.com. Locals is free to join. But if you did enjoy the show today, I do this every Sunday at 5 p.m. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Maybe hit that thumbs up, mount that like button if you want. And if you really want to support the work I'm doing, I hope you'll consider becoming a supporter in locals. And I just realized I have a typo in my ticker, but that's okay. We'll fix that for next time. Becoming a supporter of my locals comes in at $5 a month, which is apparently now the cost of like a cup of coffee at Dunkin' Donuts. Like, forget about Starbucks, now like Dunkin' Donuts level rates. You can do it also for $50 a year if you want to get 2 months for free. You can also make a one-time gift, and I will be doing a live stream shortly in my locals community just for my members. And you can get access to the chat to chat in and ask any question you want if you are a supporter. All right, guys. I will be back tomorrow with some more stuff, but take care. Again, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I will see some of you in locals very, very soon.